Hello, everyone. My father taught me many important life lessons. One of those lessons was this: when you need to make a decision, look at your options and weigh each option according to its pros and cons. And the option that has the most pros is the choice or decision you should make. That was good advice from my dad. I used it back then when I was younger. I've continued to use it throughout my life and still use it today. But when I became a Christian in 1971, I added a factor to my father's advice, and that factor was prayer. You see, my father, even though he grew up going to church, he was not a Christian. So he didn't add a spiritual element to his advice to me. But when I became a Christian, I realized that I needed to add that spiritual quotient. So I decided to add prayer to it. So I still weigh the options of each possible choice, the pros and the cons, but I take it to the Lord in prayer as well and ask Him, what do you say, Lord? Which path should I choose? Which option should I select? And sometimes He'll lead me to the practical one where the pros outweigh the cons, the pluses outweigh the minuses. And on occasion, He has led me to choose the other way, which was surprising. But when I take it to the Lord in prayer, then He guides me the right way. And He'll do the same for you. Always include prayer. In Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 10, there's this passage about the armor of God. Paul says we're all in a spiritual battle against Satan and his demons, and we need to put on the full armor of God. And so in verses 10 through 17, he talks about the armor of God, similar to a Roman soldier's armor. And he talks about the pieces of the armor and relates them in a spiritual way to us as Christians. In Ephesians 6, he says to put on these pieces of the spiritual armor: the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of readiness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. So that takes us through verse 17. Ephesians 6, 10 through 17. 6 pieces of armor that we need to put on. And oftentimes when people talk about the armor of God and refer to that passage, they stop at the end of verse 17 with that 6th piece of armor, the sword of the Spirit. And they think that's all it's needed. No, that's not all that's needed. There's one more very important element that's needed, a critical piece of the armor. And that is found in verse 18, where Paul writes, "And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying." That's the 7th piece of armor, and that piece is called prayer. And if you don't include prayer in your spiritual arsenal, then you can have all the other pieces of armor, but you're defenseless, because the devil knows that he is powerless against prayer. So when you are in a spiritual battle against Satan and temptation and sin, continue to pray. Don't neglect the other pieces of the armor, but continue to pray. If you neglect prayer, it's as though you don't have any armor on at all. The other pieces will fail you because you have failed to pray. There's an old saying, if you fail to plan, you better plan to fail. Well, the same with prayer. If you don't pray, then fail you will. So remember prayer. And remember that hymn that is so familiar to so many Christians, stand up for Jesus. Don't forget the line that says this: Put on the gospel armor, each piece put on with prayer. Amen.